Well, g'day and welcome to this week's episode. It's great to have your company. This week we take a look at shocking new revelations about Planned Parenthood in America and what they are doing with the body parts of aborted babies. Matt Cliff from Cherish Life will join me shortly. In a week where the lights almost went off in Sydney and households and businesses were told to ration their electricity, don't wash your clothes, don't wash your dishes, are we finally waking up to the folly of our so-called energy transition? Scott Hargreaves from the IPA is best placed to help us unpack this mess. And Elon Musk is reportedly considering giving Nigel Farage $100 million so his Reform Party can take government in the UK. Regular guest Bernie Finn reckons he'd like a piece of Elon's money to help shake things up here. All that and more, let's get into it. Well, Liberal Simon Birmingham announced his retirement from the Senate last week, warning his colleagues to avoid divisive culture wars. Moderates like Birmingham pretend they are above such Trumpian populism. But here's what avoiding divisive culture wars means for politicians like Birmingham. On Tuesday last week, he said he would never vote for medical care to be given to babies gasping for breath after being born alive after surviving their abortion.
President, I do not support the bill that is the subject of this discharge motion. Like Senators Hume, Kovacic and a number of my colleagues, I would not and will not ever vote for this bill or any measures that restrict women's reproductive rights.
Now, he said this during a debate on a Greens motion to throw out Senator Matt Canavan's and Alex Antica's Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill, a bill which has been languishing on the notice paper since the Morrison years. Now, a more callous remark has probably never been uttered in the Australian Senate. Birmingham can't be so naive to think that the bill would restrict women's reproductive rights, because it doesn't. But politicians like Birmingham fear bills like the Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill because they tell the truth about Australia's grisly abortion practices, something politicians like him, the radical left and the media conspire to suppress. That's why they fight the culture wars but label anyone who opposes them as Trumpian. The radical Labor Senator Penny Wong, one of Birmingham's fellow travellers ideologically, paid tribute to him, thanking him for helping her, redefine marriage in law back in 2017, a move which deliberately denies children the right of the love of their mother and father. So-called marriage equality also unleashed stage 2 of the LGBTIQA+ woke war on gender and freedom of religion. Faith-based schools are in the fight of their lives as LGBTIQA+ activists have driven legislation which, if passed, would end a school's ability to teach the truth about marriage and gender. Thousands of Australian children have now been indoctrinated into taking sterilising puberty blockers, and gender clinics are referring girls for breast removal surgery. I kid you not. In this term of Parliament, Simon Birmingham voted against every attempt to shine a light on the scandalous medical experiment being conducted upon gender-confused children. Thanks, Burmo, for avoiding the culture wars. In his valedictory speech, he openly ridiculed the Conservatives in the coalition, mocking them for supposedly obsessing over what happens in private bedrooms, end quote. Now, the truth is, no one cares what people do in their bedrooms. It's the harm Birmingham's LGBTIQA+ political activist mates want to do to children in the classroom and the hospital gender clinics that is of concern to the social conservatives in the Liberal Party. But for a guy hailed for his supposed intellect, he prefers demonisation over debate. In true Orwellian form, the Liberals and the Nationals call parliamentarians like Birmingham moderates. Now, as the chief Marxist Saul Alinsky wrote in Rules for Radicals, he who controls the language controls the masses. Birmingham and the power brokers who control the Liberal Party are anything but moderate. But the masses in the party room have succumbed to this misuse of language. The Liberal and National Party's problem is their enemies within. While Joseph Stalin coined the phrase useful idiot to describe those unwittingly batting for the other side, Birmingham knew exactly what he was doing. He was more fifth column. How such an ally of the radical left rose to become Peter Dutton's main man in the Senate goes to the heart of the problem with the coalition. I can't really recall any Liberals and Nationals ever calling Birmingham out publicly on his callous views about babies or his support for the reckless gender medicine experiment on children. Maybe they did in private, but winning political arguments is about public advocacy. The left always fights in public, and when they do, they slap down opposition by labelling it divisive culture wars. Those who promote harmful policy in public must be challenged in public. But Peter Dutton has gagged his MPs and senators from talking about abortion. Silence in the face of evil is evil. Not to speak is to speak, Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously said. Simon Birmingham had a dream run in the Senate for 18 years, never having to publicly defend his advocacy for abortion to birth or for irreversibly harming children through LGBTIQA+ gender fluid ideology. He fought the culture wars right to the end, all the while pretending anything other than his worldview was just Trumpian popularism. You see, moderates are allowed to fight the culture wars, and they do so by telling everyone else to shut up. It's one rule for me, another for thee. While ever the Liberals fail to publicly contest the ideas of their enemies within, they will continue to lose the culture wars. Those hurt by the Simon Birminghams of politics are the unborn, their mothers, and gender-confused children. Well, today we want to continue to tackle one of the most pressing issues facing Australians, our energy crisis. Last week here in New South Wales, we narrowly avoided blackouts caused by one warm day in late spring. Now, a nation rich in natural resources like coal, gas and uranium should never be rationing electricity, but here we are. To help us understand why and what can be done to fix this mess, I'm joined by Scott Hargreaves, the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Affairs. Scott, thanks very much for your time. We're being told by the government that renewables are the future, but just last week, millions of New South Wales residents were urged not to use their air conditioners or wash their clothes or their dishes to prevent the grid from collapsing. You're not surprised that we've got to this point, are you?
No, not at all. This is a taste of the future, and specifically with respect to New South Wales. We put out a report about 2 years ago called Liddell, The Line in the Sand. Liddell was a genuinely ageing coal-fired power station that probably had reached the end of its engineering life. But for the renewable zealots like Chris Bowen, that was merely just one of a long list of coal-fired power stations that were meant to be closed. And what we said, why we called our report The Line in the Sand, is we said that will push New South Wales to the limit of reliability. And indeed, we've seen in the figures that all it did really was push the load onto the remaining coal-fired power stations at a time when what Chris Bowen wanted was for Eraring, the state's largest single power station, to close by 2025. Now, thankfully, Chris Minns has managed to push that off by a few years. But imagine if they had have gone ahead with that plan, also supported by Matt Keane, to have closed Eraring next year. Then you would absolutely guarantee blackouts, because you're not seeing a rush of replacement capacity from renewables. And even if we were, they're intermittent. They don't come on when you need them. So this is a sign of the future if we keep going down the path that we're on, Lyle. Yeah,
well, you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned Matt Keane. This has been a bipartisan project, unfortunately, by our politicians that have brought us to this stage. But we're continually told that renewables are both cheaper and more reliable. But what we saw last week just shows how fragile a grid that's dominated by wind and solar can be. Given their cost and unreliability and dependence on the weather, is there really a place for renewables in our energy system? Should we just give them the flick and go from if we have to worry about emissions, go from a coal to gas to nuclear transition rather than a windmill to solar panel sort of transition?
Well, you can have a role for renewables, and certainly in remote locations, solar can play a role. Perhaps there's some role for wind, but the thing is, first of all, they've been subsidised into the grid, and all they're doing by being subsidised into the grid is destroying the economics of the existing coal-fired power stations. Chris Bowen calls them ageing coal-fired power stations. They're not ageing at all. They've got decades left on their engineering life if properly maintained. And as an aside, we've seen in Queensland, the Queensland government, the LNP government's already committed to a $1.4 billion schedule for maintenance. So they can last for a very long time. But the influx of intermittent solar and wind driven by subsidies and guarantees by the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and state governments is cutting their lunch, because they come in, they come out of the market. Coal-fired power stations have to go off. They're not making as much money. And that is creating a much higher level of renewable penetration into the grid than you would otherwise see. And so could we support a system where maybe 20% of the installed capacity is renewables? Well, yeah, probably. But we're long past that. And in our research that we've done with Stephen Wilson, who's our visiting fellow in energy security, we're talking about this idea of saturation. You can have maybe 20% from renewables, and that's manageable. 40%, barely. That's when you're starting to have reliability problems. And the idea that we could get to 80% renewable energy, which is the official Albanese government target, is just absolutely fanciful and could not be delivered in terms of reliability. And I haven't even mentioned cost, so I'll come back to cost in a minute. Yeah, well, I want to get onto cost because Chris Bowen, our Energy Minister, claimed last week, and he was quite brazen in the face of the blackouts. He said, that's no problem, it's all the fault of the ageing coal-fired power stations. You've addressed that point. But he was citing ABS statistics to say that our power bills have come down. Now, this is voodoo economics, isn't it? He's gaslighting us. Yeah, well, there's two things that I'll deal with the second element first. To talk about power bills is definitely gaslighting, because in the last budget, when it became clear that they could not deliver on their promise to lower power bills through their energy plan, and in fact they'd been driving costs up, what they introduced was, and this is what happens under these kind of crazy policies. So having subsidised renewables into the system and driven the costs up, you then have to have further subsidies for consumers so that they don't see those cost increases. So this was in the budget, and it was savaged at the time by economists like Chris Richardson and the IPA, because all that did was disguise the true cost of energy. It's hidden on our bills. And I think that, from memory, that was worth something like 70 basis points. That is 0.7 of a full percent off the what otherwise would have been the inflation rate. But it only lasts till next year. So that'll reset next year. So we'll have all the cost increases that have been building up. The subsidy scheme will run out, and bills, people are going to get the mother of all bill shocks. Wow. And again, I still haven't explained to you why the costs are going up, but I will get to that, Lyle. Yeah, well, why not? Because subject. I don't think anyone who's received a power bill lately has seen any diminution of the price. This is hurting people out in the suburbs who are paying more for their electricity than they ever have. Yeah, and so in essence, when Chris Bowen has been saying for a long time, and not just Chris, but other not just the minister, but other advocates for renewable energy, when they say wind and solar are the cheapest form of energy because you don't have to pay for the wind and you don't have to pay for the sun. But this is, of course, just propaganda. You do have to pay for the turbines and the transmission lines and the solar panels. But more to the point, what you're paying for is the intermittency. We used to have a system that delivered, based on coal-fired power, setting the marginal cost in the wholesale market, and we're just talking about the wholesale electricity market for the moment, about $50 a megawatt hour. Now that we've got renewables coming in, going off, constantly having to be balanced by gas, fast response gas generation, what you got, we've already pushed the wholesale market to about $100 a megawatt hour, with gas setting the marginal price. So it's not enough to say, when there's heaps of wind and there's heaps of sun, suddenly the price is zero or even negative. That's just cherry-picking data from those rare moments when you've got it. The fact is we've had to build a system to cope with that intermittency. And if we go to 80% renewables, then you're looking at something like $200 a megawatt hour. That's why we called our report the ruinous cost of free energy. Because it's any more free energy like this and we'll be bankrupt.
So, Scott, why don't our politicians know this? We're on the verge of blackouts, the system falling over, people are paying more for their electricity than they ever have, with greater price hikes to come, as you've just explained. Why do we continue down this path with both sides of politics saying that they're committed to net zero and staying in things like the Paris Accord?
It's a combination of any rational discussion of the extent to which climate change is anthropogenic just goes out the window because it's just believe the science. It becomes an assertion. The secular religion, we know that. There's also a very strong industry. There's a lot of people making a lot of money out of this, either producing the renewable energy contraptions or indeed, financing them, clipping the ticket on the way through. So there's a huge cheer squad for this because, of course, a system built around reliable, affordable baseload power, be it coal or nuclear, plants which operate for 50 to 70 years. Gee, Lyle, that's a little bit dull, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, who's interested in that? Very hard to make any money out of that because there's not much changing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, but Scott, if the thing that's driving this, though, is the climate debate and the Greta Thunbergs of this world, and look, let's just assume that anthropogenic climate change is a thing, and maybe it is. I don't want to get into that discussion per se, but let's just say that is the reason we've got to have this energy transition. You wouldn't transition your energy system to the one that we're currently transitioning to even if you did believe that was the thing that needed to drive it. Am I right in saying that?
Well, exactly, and the counterfactual now is what the coalition has done with introducing nuclear. So the zealots have just finished saying the most important challenge facing mankind is lowering emissions, and then someone comes along and says, "Well, why don't we use nuclear?" Because that would lower emissions and deliver reliable energy. And they're like, oh, no, we can't have that either. So it's either the most important issue facing mankind or it's not. And what we start to see is that so much of it is actually a smokescreen for pushing wind and solar. And we've seen this around the world. But there is also a pushback around the world. Interestingly enough, in the US, nuclear is now a bipartisan approach. In the UK, it's a bipartisan approach. That was the background to the UK and Australia, UK and the USA, our AUKUS partners, inviting Australia to collaborate on a project to look at civilian applications of nuclear technology. And within 24 hours, we said a flat no. I think it was absolutely embarrassing to be this outlier of a country, but it does prove that the motivations of the proponents of renewable energy are not pure. Yeah.
So this all seems very logical and apparent to people like yourself and others who are contributing to this debate. We saw the incredible Chris Hillman documentary on another network recently. What's it going to take for Australian policymakers to wake up? Is it going to be an actual catastrophe? Is that day looming, and is that the only thing that's going to cause us to change direction and put in place a grid that is fit for purpose?
Well, I really do hope not, Lyle. Blackouts are terrible things. We saw a blackout in South Australia, not uncoincidentally, not long after they'd closed their and blown up their northern coal-fired power station. And so blackouts are terrible. So I would never be the one who'd say, oh, it's just going to take a few blackouts to get people to come to their senses. And also there'll be a lot of propaganda and spin around the blackouts as well. As we've seen, Chris Bowen will just call a press conference and say, oh, it's because one of the coal-fired power stations boilers failed or tripped or something, or some transmission line fell over. There's a whole issue with transmission lines are now starting to fail. They want us to build 20,000 kilometres of new transmission lines, but we're not maintaining the ones that we have. So I think it's just going to take an honest conversation with Australians who do have ambitions for energy to be cleaner, whatever that quite means. But we're going to keep the emphasis on energy security, on reliability, on affordability. There seems little appetite for the average punter to talk about anthropogenic climate change, because it just feels like they're sick of people yelling at each other. But they know about their energy bills, and they're starting to see what's in the system. And we've also seen in the regions a revolt against the incredible construction agenda around wind and solar being built, and transmission, these 20,000 kilometres of transmission line, massive access tracks 60 metres wide through rainforests in Queensland. That's where the revolt's coming from. So what actually cracks, I just hope eventually it'll be honest conversations with politicians saying there is this thing called baseload. The only real baseload options in Australia are coal-fired or nuclear, maybe a little bit of gas if you've got heaps of it like WA. That's the honest conversation we need. Less propaganda, more facts, more understanding of the energy system.
Yeah, well, that's the great problem with our political discourse at the moment. There hasn't been enough honest conversation. Maybe last week's situation in New South Wales might prompt a bit more honesty. Scott Hargreaves, we're out of time, but really appreciate you giving yours today to help us understand what's going on in our crazy energy system. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lyle.
Now, I want to delve into a deeply troubling revelation involving US-based Planned Parenthood, one of the world's biggest abortion providers, and its alleged negotiations over the donation of fetal tissue for medical research. Now, let's be clear about what is meant by the term fetal tissue. We're talking about organs and tissue matter from unborn babies who have been killed in abortions. David Daleiden, who will be known to many of our viewers as the pro-life citizen journalist who some years ago leaked videos sensationally catching Planned Parenthood executives in the very act of negotiating the sale of baby parts to biotech companies. Now, Kamala Harris, whose name might also ring a bell, prosecuted Daleiden at the time when she was the Attorney General of the state of California. She didn't prosecute Planned Parenthood for illegally trying to cash in on the parts of dead babies. She prosecuted the whistleblower. Now, the last known organisation to commercialise body parts from murdered humans were the Nazis. That's just a statement of fact. Now, despite Harris's persecution of Daleiden, he has persisted in his pro-life advocacy all these years. His latest revelations come through America's equivalent of freedom of information laws, where Daleiden has obtained emails indicating that Planned Parenthood negotiated terms for donating aborted fetuses, some up to 23 weeks of gestation, to the University of California, San Diego, for research purposes. Daleiden told the New York Post, and I quote, "These documents show that Planned Parenthood is supplying healthy babies who are old enough to survive outside the womb from late-term abortions to the University of California's royalty-generating experiments," end quote. Now, joining me now to discuss this is Matt Cliff, the CEO of Cherish Life Queensland. Matt, thanks for your time. How do these latest revelations impact the ongoing debate about the morality and legality of late-term abortions in particular?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lyle. So, first and foremost, off the top, again, these allegations are, well, this evidence is deeply troubling, as you can imagine. With regards to the debate, look, in terms of most Australians are against late-term abortion. This means that, to be honest, Lyle, we can be pretty much assured that most Australians would be horrified to know that this type of practice of selling aborted babies' remains is taking place in America. So, yeah, it's deeply outrageous and very, very concerning.
So, Matt, what do we know about what's happening in Australia? Do we have a situation here where the parts of aborted babies are also being used for medical research?
Well, look, from what we know currently, the evidence doesn't suggest that. So Mary Stopes International would be kind of the Australian equivalent of Planned Parenthood. And we don't have evidence that they are selling the remains of aborted babies. In fact, the organisation from where they come from the UK, there is a management of fetal tissue policy. And as far as I'm aware, there's never been an investigation into the matter.
What about, I mean, I'm sure, I hope you're right in that there's no one selling the parts of unborn babies who have been aborted, but what about donating their tissue for medical research? Do you know whether that happens in Australia or not?
That's a good question. Again, it's a bit hazy, to be honest, the evidence, but so I can't really comment emphatically, but that's something that we would definitely be interested in looking further into.
Yeah, no, I think it probably does warrant some investigation. Often if these things are happening in universities and medical research areas in the United States, often their counterparts in countries like Australia are wanting to do the same if they're not already doing it. David Daleiden, who I think is a hero of the pro-life movement, he uncovered these emails and he's accused Planned Parenthood in the US of institutional racism, citing discrepancies in the consent forms that were provided, presumably to the mothers of the aborted babies. Some forms were in English, some in Spanish. The English version said the baby parts had commercial value. The Spanish version omitted this vital information. And I guess Daleiden's saying, well, is that racism that one group of people are told about the commercial value of their unborn baby and the others are not?
Yeah, look, I think the reality is, Lyle, Planned Parenthood, in my perspective, are one of the most evil organisations in the world. You know, not only do they provide misinformation to profit off the back of vulnerable women who are seeking help with crisis pregnancies, they also obviously consistently lie, and they also profit again off selling the aborted children. So this is not an organisation that has any credibility whatsoever, to be honest.
No, that's exactly right, and good on the New York Post for publishing these latest allegations. Matt, finally, we saw last week in the Australian Senate the leader of the coalition there, Simon Birmingham, announcing his retirement. But before he announced his retirement, he said he would never vote for one of these born alive bills. That is a bill to provide medical care for babies born alive after late-term abortion, something that happens in Australia once a week. There's a real callousness, isn't there, about many of the pro-abortion supporters in our parliaments?
I think callousness is a really friendly word, Lyle, to be honest. I'm just completely baffled, to be honest, why anyone would be against this. I've obviously given testimony in the Senate hearing, give testimony in the Queensland hearing, and my question to this is, why? How can you be against this? That's my reoccurring question. You know, in the Senate hearing, we realised that the denial was because they said it didn't exist, which has completely been proved to be false now. We know this happens. In the Queensland bill, in the Queensland Senate inquiry, what was interesting was the committee went against the report or decided not to do any amendments because they felt that the objection to abortions this would prevent access to abortion was warranted, which is absolutely insane because, again, this bill doesn't restrict abortions whatsoever. The only issue, the actual restriction they cited was stigma. It wasn't a physical restriction or anything like that. It's because it might impose a stigma on those getting abortions, which, again, is completely subjective. Yep. Absolutely crazy. But then when you see senators like Mr. Birmingham come out and say that, again, you just wonder, have you actually looked at the research? Have you actually looked at what's going on here? Yep. It's confusing.
It seems that they don't want to look at it. He doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that there are babies being born alive and left to die, and he's trying to suppress that by saying he doesn't want to do anything to take away so-called reproductive rights. Matt Cliff, really appreciate your perspective, appreciate the fight you're waging up there in Queensland, and we look forward to hopefully seeing some better legislation to protect babies born alive up in that state now that there's a new government there. Matt, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Lyle. Thank you.
Well, it's time for our semi-regular Straight Talk session with Bernie Finn, Family First lead Senate candidate for Victoria, and a former long-time Liberal member of the Victorian Upper House in the state parliament. The Liberals expelled Bernie because of his pro-life and pro-family views, but we're glad to have him at Family First. Bernie, we haven't spoken since Donald Trump's victory. You predicted it. Did you think it would be as comprehensive as it was?
I did, actually. Yes, I did. I had predicted some months ago that he would win bigly. And bigly he did win. It was. I mean, I just could not see how. You look at the polls, you see that 70% of the electorate say America was heading in the wrong direction, and people thought he was going to win. I don't think so. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. And clearly the polls for some time now in the swing states had been trending toward Trump, and he was leading in just about every one of them.
Well, he trounced it. He won the trifecta, the House, the Senate, the popular vote, and of course, the quadrilla, if you count all those battleground states. This really has put the woke agenda on the back foot, hasn't it, Bernie? I mean, people are starting to talk about the Trump effect. It's starting to wash over into Australia. Is this a moment that can be seized by thinking people, conservatives, people who are mainstream? Is this our opportunity to make some headway over the next few years?
Lyle, I think if you think that the Trump effect is having an impact now, just wait for another 12 months, because it is going to be full on, it is going to be beautiful, it is going to be magical, and it is going to affect every part of the world. And one of the things that I was so excited about, and I am so excited about with President Trump's return to the Oval Office, is that here we have a guy who is not going to be funding those people who are out to destroy our lifestyle. Yeah. He's not going to be funding those people who want to destroy the Western world. We have one of our own in the Oval Office, and it's been 4 years, but it seems a hell of a lot longer, I've got to tell you.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's going to be no funding for crazy climate renewable projects. He's going to drill, baby, drill, get the economy going. He's not going to fund transgender stuff. As a whole, it's a new day in America. It's morning in America.
It is exciting. It is exciting. It is exciting beyond words. Yeah. And, I can understand why the left are despairing. They have reason to despair, and we should take every opportunity on our side of politics, the conservative side of politics, wherever we are around the world.
But they're not, are they? They're not taking those opportunities. I mean, one of the first things the Liberal Party here in Australia did when Donald Trump said we're getting out of the Paris Climate Accord, Jonathan Dunningham, the Liberals' environment spokesman in Canberra, said we're staying in Paris.
Well, you've got to remember, Jonathan was the man who knifed Erica Betts in Tasmania. So you can't expect anything from him. I've got to tell you. I met him some years ago when Eric invited him along to a meeting of Conservative Liberals that we had in Tasmania. I think that's the only mistake that Eric's ever made. Yeah. It was just a bad move. But you are right. You are right. The Liberals are not taking advantage of it, but they're going to have to, because people want them to.
People will demand it.
They are demanding it. They are sick to death of the Liberals just being a very weak and mild brand of Labor. And even with Peter Dutton's support for
net zero emissions. Yeah,
zero emissions. I mean that's just absolute insanity in my view. He should be getting onto that, running with it, grabbing it, running with it as fast and as hard as he can. But instead, he's sitting back saying, "Oh, we don't want to upset anybody." Well, you don't have to. Let me tell Peter Dutton something, and that is the game's up. People have had enough. Families across Australia, farmers across Australia, small businesses across Australia. We have had a gutful, and we're not going to put up with it anymore.
Yeah, and the sooner the Liberal Party gets that message, the better.
Absolutely.
Bernie, also in sort of breaking news today from the US, Joe Biden has pardoned his son Hunter, who's obviously been convicted and is facing many more criminal charges. Of course, it's well known what's happened with that laptop and the revelations there of him giving kickbacks to the big guy, which of course was a reference to Joe himself. So it looks like the Biden family is looking after itself.
Well, the Biden family always does look after itself. And, we had a situation where just a few months ago when Hunter was first convicted, Joe looked into the camera and said solemnly, "I will not pardon Hunter. I will not pardon Hunter." And here he is today. He's done a complete backflip. I wouldn't have thought it possible that a man in his condition could do that, but he has. And the only thing I can say is that he might be able to pardon Hunter, but I can absolutely guarantee that President Trump will not pardon him when those charges come against him.
Interesting. Bernie, I've got to get your thoughts on this, back to domestic matters here in Australia. It's not even Christmas, and yet the Australia Day 2025 wars have already begun. It happens every year. The radical left sharpen their swords against our National Day. The Herald Sun in Melbourne is reporting that the celebrations, Australia Day celebrations, have been banned at more than 200 pubs and bars nationwide because the owners say the day causes sadness and hurt for some people. Bernie, I've got to get your thoughts on this. I think I know what you're going to say.
I think you do too. Lyle, I've got to tell you something. I would die of thirst before I walked into any of those pubs for a beer, a lemonade, a glass of water, anything. I will never, ever set foot in any of those pubs again. And I have to say to you that one of those pubs is one of my regulars, the Imperial, which is across the road from Parliament House in Melbourne. And I will never, ever, if I live to be 300, set foot in any of those pubs again. I think this is disgraceful. You know, this is the Australian Service Company, I think they call themselves. They should not, under any circumstances, use the term Australian, because they are not. Yeah. They are not. And, you know, my wife asked me this morning, has anybody ever fired up in America about Thanksgiving Day or Independence Day? And I just laughed and thought, don't be ridiculous. That would never happen there. You know, over in America, if anybody tried this sort of nonsense, they'd be taken out and shot. Yep. And you've got to say there's an argument for it here. I'm not advocating it. I'm not advocating it.
Be careful,
Bernie. There is a fair argument.
The E-Safety Commissioner is watching us today. But your wife, Kathy, is a very wise woman. That's a very astute observation. Bernie,
it is.
We were talking a minute ago about the Trump effect. Now, there's reports from the United Kingdom overnight that Elon Musk, one of Trump's biggest backers and the man who saved free speech by buying X, he's considering giving the Reform Party leader Nigel Farage $100 million to help make him the next Prime Minister of Great Britain. Elon is really serious about getting the Western countries back on track, isn't he?
He is. He's just doing an amazing job. I would not have thought in a million years. It's amazing how you can get people so wrong. I wouldn't have thought in a million years that Elon Musk would be the saviour of the world in the way that he is. And I'm not referring to the ultimate saviour, of course, but saving common sense and the good side of things in the way that he has. And he's now, as you say, proposing to give Nigel Farage $100 million to fight the next campaign. Nigel is now the preferred Prime Minister, I should add, in Great Britain. So, the other two have just fallen by the wayside. Nigel has taken it and run, as I anticipated he would. But I think we are seeing a revolution, the sorts of which we have not witnessed before in the world. This is bigger than the Russian Revolution. This is sweeping the world before it, and it's all being done through the will of the people, the power of the people, and for the people. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be alive at the moment. To see what is happening around the world, and of course to look at the possibilities of what that will mean for Family First in 2025, because we might have an election in just maybe even weeks' time, just a few weeks' time. And we might be fighting hard up until that point. But I'm absolutely convinced, and I have to say I was prepared. I'd made up my mind that I was going to Washington, D.C. For the inauguration. But I've decided that I am needed here. My campaigning is needed here. I'm not going to Washington. It's too cold anyway. But I'm not going to Washington. And I'm going to be, this week I'll be in Benalla, and I'm going to be in Warrnambool. I'm going to be in Colac. I'm going to be in Geelong. I'm going to be in Bendigo. I'm going to be in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, the northern suburbs of Melbourne, everywhere that we have to be to win this election. And, Family First is going to be a major part of the revolution in Australia. Yep. And, I thank the Lord for giving me the opportunity to be a part of it.
I couldn't agree more, Bernie. Look,
it's just extraordinary.
We're thrilled to have you on board. I'm speaking with my Family First hat on. Our viewers know that I'm a part of Family First as you are. Let's just hope that Elon Musk sees the importance of helping Australia out as he's helped the US and hopefully Great Britain, because this war on woke extends down here as well. Bernie, I know you're fighting hard. You have been all year. We look forward to seeing how your campaign shapes up in Victoria, and hopefully some of that Musk money coming behind you as well. Elon, if you're watching, Family First, your Reform Party here in Australia. Bernie, want to wish you all the best for Christmas. Thanks for being part of the Lyle Shelton Show throughout 2024, and we look forward to talking more again in the new year.
Well, to you, Lyle, and to your viewers, all the very best for a wonderful, a happy, and a holy Christmas. This is the most magical time of the year. Long may it stay that way. And I'm telling you now, if I get into Parliament, it will.
Yeah, good on you, Bernie. God bless you.
Good on you, Lyle. Thank you.
Well, welcome to Gender Reveal, our regular spot with binary spokesperson Kirralie Smith. Kirralie, it's great to have you back. Let's delve into some recent developments. You had your book launch in Parliament House last week, the book Devastated, telling the story of families who have been affected by gender fluid ideology on their children. You had a special guest there in terms of your local member, David Gillespie. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, Dr. David Gillespie came along, which was fantastic because he got to hear firsthand from 3 of the parents who contributed to the book. And I can tell you, Lyle, there wasn't a dry eye in the house as they shared the devastation that has been caused to their children, and in one case, a spouse as well. But Dr. David Gillespie, he has 33 years' experience as a medical practitioner, and he spoke very bluntly and very plainly about, he labelled it gender voodoo.
Wow.
He said that it is a real shame on the medical profession that they've given into this ideology without using evidence-based methods to really analyse whether or not these are the best pathways. He's ashamed of his profession that they have gone this way. He highlighted the way that the Cass report and the Nordic countries and others are pausing or halting altogether the use of puberty blockers because the evidence just isn't there in terms of the care. And, he really encouraged people to keep contacting their local members because they are absolutely swamped with every agenda under the sun. And unless you are constantly presenting it, giving them the facts and giving them a way forward, it's very unlikely they'll pick up this cause. So we've gotten this book into the hands of every single member of Parliament in Canberra. And I really want to encourage people now to pick up the phone, send an email and ask your local member to read this book because these stories need to be told and the voices in this book speak for themselves. And it is utter devastation that's being caused as a result of really bad laws and bad policy in the education and health systems in particular.
Fantastic, Kirralie. Congratulations on such a great initiative. So where can people get a hold of the book Devastated?
At the moment, it's just through binary.org.au. However, other options will be coming soon, but definitely get in touch with us there. There is a special page that you can go to get the book, or you can send me an email at info@binary.org.au and we'll get you one or more copies.
Fantastic. A great resource, an Australian resource telling Australian stories. Terrific initiative from Binary. Kirralie, I should just also add, we're talking off air, the terrific journalist Bernard Lane, who we had on this show last week. He's written about the book as well, hasn't he, on his Gender Clinic News website or Substack that people can go to and have a read of that.
Correct. And it was really great to be able to honour someone like Bernard Lane. He has been we took back the term persistent and consistent because he has, put his career on the line really to pursue this and for child safeguarding in particular. And he's done a fabulous job. And he has quoted a lot of Dr. David Gillespie's speech in his Gender Voodoo article. And I do encourage everyone to go and read it.
Very good. Get your copy of the book at binary.org.au and go to Gender Clinic News to read Bernard Lane's take. Kirralie, in the United States, President Donald Trump, who's been very firm on these gender issues, his transition team briefed out, or someone within the team spoke to the media, said they were going to kick out of the military all transgender service personnel. They sort of walk that back a bit. They're saying they haven't made a final decision. But nonetheless, it seems Donald Trump means business when it comes to restoring normalcy about gender.
Oh, absolutely. And look, if there's any industry or area where merit and ability should be the only requirements for being involved, it is in the military. We don't really care what your personality preferences are, what your sexual preferences are. You need to be able to do the job, and that is to defend your country. And it's just absurd that both in the US and here in Australia, it's now all about, paint your pinkies and DEI and all of these other factors that really don't go to helping defend our nation, but, appease people's feelings. And to be quite frank, our enemies don't care what your feelings are. They just, they need to come up against the best and the brightest and the bravest that our countries can offer. So good on Donald Trump, and I hope that they do follow through. Yeah, and let's hope it spills over to the Australian military as well. Kirralie, just lastly, Senator Simon Birmingham, a Liberal who'd been in the Parliament for about 18 years, announced his retirement. This man has pretty much run obstruction to every initiative to try and shine a light on the harm being done to children through the child gender clinics. He'll be no loss from the Parliament, will he? Absolutely not. And what a disgrace. He is and others who have opposed both Senator Alex Antic and Senator Pauline Hanson and others who have tried to get these inquiries into gender clinic practices, because these practices are doing great harm to children. We know already that in the UK, these practices have been banned. In Nordic countries, even New Zealand is now questioning these practices because it does great harm to children. What is it that Simon Birmingham and others are trying, what are they trying to cover up? What is it that they know? Because we do know the harm that's being done, and why are they so afraid of having a light shone on the actual facts of the matter, and why are they appeasing these gender activists instead of safeguarding children? It's a question that has no logical answer, apart from the fact that people like Simon Birmingham are fighting for a different side to that of mums and dads and vulnerable children. That photo we had on screen a moment ago was Simon Birmingham with a drag queen. There it is again. That was a promotion in Parliament House in Canberra last year to promote World Pride, which is a big LGBTIQA+ festival here in Sydney, which was promoting animal-human sexual fetishes. That's the sort of support that Simon Birmingham was giving to all sorts of weird agendas. So, no loss to the Parliament. Kirralie, thank you once again for being with us. We look forward to your contribution, hopefully next week for our final show for 2024. Keep up the fight, and everyone go to Binary and get a hold of that book, Devastated. Thanks again, Kirralie. Thanks, Lyle. Well, before I go, don't forget you can follow me on X during the week at Lyle Shelton, and don't forget to make ADH TV your home of common sense news and uncensored opinion. Thanks to Charles Noble and Dominica Fernal for production. Until next week, keep pushing back and keep speaking up.